Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you happen to be tuning in from. My name is Mary Yang. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Syxsense, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this webinar recapping the 2024 RSA conference with you. Just a bit of housekeeping and level setting before we dive in. If you're not familiar with Syxsense, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what we do so you have a sense of our perspective for today's webinar. We've been around for several years, developing automated endpoint and vulnerability management solutions, primarily for compliance-driven organizations. We help hundreds of enterprises around the world find and fix their IT and cyber risks. This means automating patching, continuously identifying both software and security vulnerabilities, remediating any of those issues that are found, whether that's through implementing compensating controls or updating configurations to reduce your attack surface. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A today, and we'll try to get to them after our presentation. If we can't get to them during this call, we'll be sure to send you a follow-up note with our answer. Now, I'm very excited to introduce my counterpart, Rob Brown, our Chief Customer Success Officer. He's in charge of onboarding, implementation, and training for our entire customer base. That means he gets a firsthand look every day at how companies are improving their security and management processes, but also where they're struggling. Today, we're going to chat about RSA and try to distill in about 40 minutes or so some of the topics and themes that really stood out to us. According to the conference organizers, there were more than 400 sessions. So obviously, there's not enough time in this webinar to dive into everyone, but we thought we'd highlight some key topics that were relevant and interesting and really sort of stole the show from a topics perspective. Rob, are you ready to dive in?
I certainly am.
So to kick things off, here's a quick snapshot of the topics that we'll be talking through in this session. The SBOM, which is a software bill of materials, if that's not a phrase that you've heard before. AI and security, of course. How could we do a presentation about RSA without talking about AI? And platformization versus innovation. Really interesting discussions around this at the show. The risks of being a CISO now, and cyber insurance. I'm going to give just a quick, brief recap of these topics and then get thoughts from Rob about each of them, especially how he's seeing enterprises deal with them on a daily basis. All right, so dropping the SBOM. SBOMs have benefits, but can increase an organization's risk in a few ways. There were a lot of discussions about SBOM, multiple sessions about the topic at RSA. If you're not familiar, the software bill of materials is a concept that was introduced several years ago now. It's been on the docket and essentially is designed to be a sort of rundown of the code and other components of an application. Similar to a piece of hardware, when you get a machine, a laptop, you'll often have somewhere available a hardware bill of materials that defines all of the different components of that laptop. And SBOM is that, but on the software side. One of the interesting things about this is just how difficult it is to implement. And that came through in some of the sessions that we saw. So Manoj Prasad with the computer science at Western Washington University, a faculty member there, had a presentation about sort of navigating SBOMs, especially as it continues to evolve. There are a few issues that he called out very directly, right? Oftentimes inaccurate inventory, just not knowing essentially what might be the threat or unknown vulnerability from a piece of software, the interoperability of that SBOM format, as well as things like automated tools that are coming onto the market to help identify or elucidate an SBOM right now, that can be somewhat difficult to do. There was also attendee from Schneider Electric who mentioned that they have about 4,000 S-bombs that they are trying to manage and get their hands around. And the automation tools that they used had about a 15% rating confidence from the tools that were just sort of spitting out the output. So that was some of the discussions at a broad level about the SBOM. And now I wanted to get Rob's take on what's happening with SBOM, what he might be seeing with some of the customers as it pertains to getting their hands around this, right? Really is about a visibility issue.
Thanks,
Rob,
Mary.
what are some of your thoughts?
You know, it surprises me greatly when we're onboarding new customers that they focus primarily on Microsoft and Linux software, including updates. And I'm even more surprised that they say that third-party updates are not needed because they self-update automatically. So, you have a particular set of software that you're excluding because you're assuming that they're going to look after themselves. But here's the problem. Often third-party updates and software, they may have a self-update method, but they often need to be enabled. They're not by default enabled. And secondly, they have to be launched in order to update. So if you've purchased a piece of software for a particular project, as long as you're opening that application, if a self-update exists, it is updating. But if you have that software on your machine and you don't launch it, then that is going to pose a significant risk. It may never update, and actually at worst, it may go obsolete, which poses the most serious risk. So simply create yourself a vendor risk questionnaire. Find out where your vendor is creating the software, and if that software is creating an update, does that come from the same country? In this example, you might have the software created in the United States, but the patches are available from the United Kingdom. It's very important to find out, especially as the landscape is moving quite quickly. Also, find out where your vendors are, who to contact in the event of a potential exploit, especially if you see in the news an application will say Log4j. Log4j is being announced as an exploit, and that is a very unique part of a piece of software because it isn't an encompassing tool. It is a part of an application, which is where your vendor risk questionnaire and your SBOM documentation will become super important. You'll be able to find out where that is if you're vulnerable. And lastly, go ahead and create simulations. This is the easiest way to know how you're able to react to something like an exploit. If you are looking, for example, Log4j again, are you able to find out which machines have that software installed? How quickly can you react? Simulate it so that you know what to do if it ever happens to you in the future.
All right, thank you, Rob. That's fabulous. We're going to move on to the next topic, AI in security. Just as you can imagine, was a huge topic at RSA, lots of sessions around AI. One that we wanted to call out, a bit of a interview that Jay Chaudhry with Zscaler did, was really talking about the ways in which threat actors are starting to use AI. Of course, there's, sort of with great power comes great responsibility. This is technology that can be used by anyone. If you've been keeping up on any of the AI stuff, you'll know that some of the stories that have come out have been around how AI threat actors are using AI today. One of the things that's sort of popped up is the ability for threat actors to use AI to improve their phishing emails, right? Improve the likelihood that you'll be clicking on things because it starts to remove the weird dialogue and language, and make sure that the grammar is correct and the punctuation is correct. But Jay Chaudhry actually highlighted how generative AI in particular has made it even easier for threat actors. and really to sort of supercharge their productivity, right? He talks about how now threat actors can just go to ChatGPT and ask it to really output all of the vulnerabilities that are on a particular system, like a VPN system, for example. And now it's just a matter of seconds for them to be able to get that information at their fingertips. There were the sort of flip side of that is, defenders and blue teams using AI to supercharge their efforts. And there was a lot of discussion around this too. There's a couple of slides here from two different presentations that we wanted to highlight. So one was a Thales presentation that talked a little bit about, using AI and ML models and the security risk that brings to the organization itself. This is just a sample slide. You can't quite read the disclaimer there. We'll send a link to the session for everyone. But this gives you a sense of, as a CISO, as an organization that might be adopting AI, what is a way to think about the potential risk implications to your organization with AI itself? And then the sort of blue team side of the house, how exactly do you enable AI to support your organization, using it to supercharge security efforts or risk and privacy efforts? There were a few different models that were discussed and frameworks that were discussed around those issues. And of course, here at Syxsense, we've been talking about AI as well. And our customers are seeing it on a daily basis, right? There's no escaping this. So Rob, what have you been seeing with AI on the customer side?
I'm really excited about AI, but as Chief Customer Officer, I do speak to a lot of CISOs on both sides of the pond, and I'm seeing a fascinating divide, really. In the UK, we're interested, but we're not ready to commit. We don't really want to sort of charge forward with the technology. In the US, I'm seeing that there's a lot of interest and they see this as the future, but they want to understand the intelligence. How does the AI actually help? And so we have to sort of bridge this gap, especially until we find out all of the answers to those questions. And I think there is a middle ground. I think some good old hyper automation can solve this. If you can automate everything from the deployment of software, such as your antivirus, your patching strategy, hunting down of known vulnerabilities, remediating them, things that would usually require somebody to perform of that function. Let's get technology to do it. What is left? This unknown, as I call it, the unknown threats, that's where the people in your organization that know your organization the most can start using AI to find out if there is any risks left and actually to implement solutions to those risks. But you can't do it if you don't have the time, which is why I think the automation will really help.
That's fabulous. Are you seeing, so you said there's a lot of skepticism. Have you seen any customers implement AI on their systems?
Well, in terms of AI, you have to look at what is the AI doing, and sometimes you feed the AI system the known kind of threats. So you allow the AI to tell you what you can actually find out if you know what you're looking for. So they are implementing AI in a way, but actually you're feeding the AI the answers. So in theory, you are your own AI.
I hear you. Yeah. So, and there's a bit of pattern matching that's happening, right? So if you feed it only certain things, it's only going to find kind of those things or things that look very similar to that.
That's correct.
I think that makes a ton of sense. How many customers are you seeing moving into the automation field and really driving the automation side?
Well, we actually actively encourage that. So it is a bit interesting when you're onboarding new customers and you're working with the teams that have historically been delivering their security their security best practices, the delivery of antivirus, the configuration of configuration items within their estate. And you're actually telling them how to effectively make their job easier to a certain extent, not actually needed anymore. But we encourage that, because what we're actually saying is these tools are able to make your job easier, and instead of actually running the tool and doing it yourself, you're actually validating the outcome of your work rather than actually clicking the buttons. You're just making sure from a compliance side that your environment is totally safe. And we are seeing at least 65 to 75% of customers are actually adopting this fully automated approach into the management of their estate.
That's great. I can imagine also that that automation frees up a lot of time for that staff to really focus on things like, how do you use AI? How can you innovate within the business and just kind of get better overall at improving the security of their organization?
Absolutely. Sometimes the biggest risk is that you don't have time. You're so busy doing the things which, there's an analogy that 20% of your day is actually the most important and 80% of the day isn't. Well, let's flip that around. Let's automate everything that is the 80%, so it allows you to focus on the 20% of your day that really does make a difference to your business.
Yeah. I hope this is considered in the 20% of the most important part of your
Hmm.
day today. All right. So moving on to the next topic, platformization versus innovation. Yep. It's a thing. Platformization is a phrase that was sort of bandied about a little bit by the media and analysts as they were seeing some of the trends coming through at RSA. A lot of the big vendors were essentially doing this, right? Adding either modules or announcing, the integrations from previous acquisitions into their system, and it was really about saying, you just have to buy into the platform and you'll have everything at your fingertips. It was interesting to see that juxtaposed against some survey stats that came out of the conference in terms of attendee expectation and what attendees were looking for at the conference itself. So these were a couple of charts from a study that was surveying RSA participants. There were about 72 folks who had been surveyed who specifically said that they were looking for new vendors, not looking at known brands that were feeding into the platformization concept. And we've heard a lot about tool consolidation and really trying to drive towards tools that could maybe platforms that can take on everything, right? But in the survey, less than 10% of the folks who had responded expected to reduce their tools. It was a really interesting juxtaposition, and part of that was because the survey respondents and folks who attend RSA, they're looking on the show floor for innovation. They're looking for best of breed approaches. I've been to RSA for almost a decade now, and without fail, I'll talk to attendees who are on the outskirts of the expo hall, looking and talking to folks in the smaller booths because that's where they believe the innovation to be. And it was interesting to kind of see all of these press releases come out around new platform, especially after this integration from this acquisition, versus the survey and just the anecdotes that I have from talking to folks on the ground. So I wanted to chat through this a little bit with Rob. The idea that more tools create more complexity. That's certainly something that we believe at Syxsense and that we've seen. We've talked with analysts who say the same thing. But what's your take on sort of the idea of innovation versus platformization? And are you seeing customers who are looking for more best of breed innovative tools?
Hmm. We've been delivering managed services for about 20 years across various different software platforms. Now we really focus only on the Syxsense technology, but if we think about the large platforms, we know what they are. They've been around since Windows XP. And what you find is that they do acquire these other companies, and then they integrate those technologies into their tech stack, often just simply to check a box, maybe on a marketing on a website, that kind of thing. But although they are built into this platform, they often don't communicate very well together. They maybe have been written in different languages, and you have to find different ways to get your data out. For example, you might have a console to access all of the Windows and Linux data, and then you have to access the web console if you want to access the Mac OS data. And when you need a single source of truth, getting access from these large platforms is really difficult. And some customers have come to Syxsense because they've reverted to good old spreadsheets. They needed a single source of truth from multiple locations, and they actually reverted back to Excel, which is often out of date straight away. So as soon as you have the document saved, it becomes very difficult. And what we're seeing is where you have these large platforms and you do require specific solutions to very new problems, they're looking to these tools that are innovative. Now, innovation enables solutions to build specific functions, solutions for those specific goals. But you have to challenge, you have to somehow get this data working together. You need to have it together in a central location. And even though they're all designed with different languages, if you think about a universal language to communicate them all, you would talk about using APIs. So calling an API function from whatever technology allows you to integrate these smaller tools in with other smaller tools across the innovation spectrum. And I think that does allow you to have a better picture of the story. And because you're using APIs and because they're so standardized, you have a very, almost non-manual process to follow. And I think that this is becoming very much more popular when the CISO has particular challenges, maybe doesn't have a huge amount of budget to spend, and they are looking to the tools that are more innovative to solve the problem.
Thank you, Rob. That's really fascinating, and I think that makes a ton of sense. Sort of jives with everything that I've seen as well. One thing that I did want to get your thoughts on sort of plays into this a little bit about sort of innovation versus these legacy tools that might be in organizations. And so I'm gonna see if I can play this clip here.
When you see innovation on offense, you really go right to the zero-day account. And we had a long run of tracking this from 1998 right up till now. And it used to be between 10 to 15 0 days a year were found. And a zero-day, of course, attack with no patch. Now you're looking at, we found 97 0 days in the last year in the wild, about a third of them found by Mandiant and Google. What I found most interesting about these 0 days is really shown on this slide. And I know there's a bunch of numbers here, but focus in on the amount of vendors impacted. And that also includes like freeware. I guess we just call different libraries a vendor. But when you look at this, 31 vendors impacted, and there's always the big three. You're gonna have Microsoft, you're gonna have Google, you're gonna have Apple. But then in addition to those, we've got 28 other organizations that there are zero-day attacks against them. To put that in perspective, there's about 4 companies impacted outside of the big three in 2018. So the number of vendors being attacked is phenomenal. Now, why are there this many 0 days? There's a whole bunch of rampant theories on it. Maybe we got better at defense, and so you have to break in with 0 days. Maybe the offense is so well funded now, they just come up with them more. Maybe AI is helping the offense find vulnerabilities faster. Maybe we're all just shipping really bad software and not trying hard enough to patch it. I actually think maybe it's a combination of some of that, but it's actually because the impact of the breach, if you do espionage, you get what you want, and if you do crime, you get what you want. Cyber intrusions are paying off, and that's why I think you're seeing this happen. But again, what this means is you've got to have a way to respond to the 0 day. This slide shows that globally, when we looked at every incident we responded to, the #1 way people broke in was in fact an exploit. What this means is all of us have to think, assume breach, do attack surface management, do patch management, and then really have great rules for what happens post those things. You know, the assumed breach mentality. I just saw G2 say segmentation is hard, updating is hard, and patching is hard. That's okay. We got to do them. There will always be a 0 day. And you heard people say we're going to do secure by design and get it down to 0. But 0 day is not just software. At some point in time when you assume breach, you also make the assumption maybe you have an insider that can create havoc on the network. So the bottom line, this trend is different. From 1998 to approximately 2019, the #1 way people were breaking in is spear phishing and exploiting human trust. It has changed since 2020 back to what it was like from 1993 to 1998, which is exploitation. And for those who just need to see what are they exploiting, there you go. There's the top 3 things that were exploited in 2023 for us.
Fascinating, right? Some fascinating stats, and really interesting to see that move of exploitation becoming that #1 initial vector again, especially since, you know, I feel like most days and with security awareness training, it really is about the, you know, don't click on links in the email, right? The phishing attacks and business email compromise. Give me some of your thoughts. I'd love to just hear your reaction.
It was a fantastic video. And in fact, it resonates so well with the 0 day because right at the beginning of the video, he defined 0 day correctly, where a 0 day vulnerability is an exploit that doesn't have a patch. That was the true definition of a 0 day vulnerability. And so if you didn't have a patch, how are you going to resolve the vulnerability? How are you going to solve it? How are you going to keep your environment safe? And therefore, you've got these mitigations that are available, you've got counteractions. And what's really fascinating is that often, how do we find out about a 0 day in the first place? How do you find out that there has been a 0 day exploit? It comes through the media. And to a certain degree, who goes through the websites every day to find out where the next or where the last 0 day has come from? The way that I think 0 days should be handled going forward is that you've got some kind of automated acceleration of 0 day vulnerability remediation. Whether that vulnerability remediation is a patch that is finally provided by the vendor, or whether you have the mitigation that gets around the vulnerability, potentially a group policy or something that can change on the be modified on the device to actually bypass the vulnerability completely. But there has to be some kind of automated, accelerated way because, as I've spoken on other webinars, it always seems to happen on a Friday. It always happens on a Friday when we're about to hit the weekend, we're starting to relax, and we're not necessarily paying complete attention to the news. So the entire weekend has been allowed to go by where potentially you are the victim. You need to have an automated way to detect these 0 day vulnerabilities in your organization, react to them if they're serious enough, find out what your exposure is firstly, and most importantly, because if it's a particular 0 day for a software you don't have, we go back to our SBOM. But if you do have that software, how quickly can you remediate it?
Yeah, that I get a little PTSD flashbacks of Log4j, and it happened for folks who didn't live through it like I did, right before the Christmas holiday, like the Thursday before the Christmas holiday, and so my entire Christmas was spent dealing with the aftermath of Log4j, as well as probably a lot of folks listening in on this call, and it was definitely one heck of a holiday that year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me,
Yeah.
it was Petya and not Petya. It happened around the same time, and I was actually on holiday myself, trying to let customers know that they're in great hands, that the teams are working really hard to solve the vulnerability. But often, you might find it in a news bulletin a couple of days later, and unfortunately, you're just too late.
Yeah, yeah. I think that it also, all of that sort of talks to as well, like what you had been saying a little earlier about, especially that third party patching, right? The fact that, even this speaker called out the big three, Microsoft, Google, and Apple, but 28 other vendors were part of that list. That's a massive list. And if you're not doing the patching across your third party software and applications, it's just a gaping hole for your organization.
Massively.
Yeah. All right. Keeping track of time here. We're going to move on to a really fascinating set of sessions at RSA, really all focused around the risk of being a CISO now. One of the sessions, the speaker talked about, you know, 5-6 years ago, he'd have people come up to him and ask him, what do I need to do to become a CISO? And now he's getting calls where people are saying, hey, I just got offered the CISO job. Do I actually want it? And it's been an interesting shift, especially over the last year, where you saw CISOs indicted and being held legally responsible for breaches that have happened to their organization. So some of the things that they talked about, they noted that while some of these indictments have happened, it's not necessarily common. While litigation and threats of litigation have increased. One of the ways that they suggested CISOs could really try to hone in on keeping themselves a bit more sort of safe and secure were to really understand the risks and the benefits, and using a RACI model to help elucidate across the organization where the CISO has responsibility or accountability versus just being consulted or informed. And they also talked about arranging personal legal and insurance protection in advance, right? They talked about how an organization might have legal counsel, but that's not necessarily legal counsel for the CISO, and that insurance for the organization, cyber insurance for the organization, might not extend to them personally. It was fascinating to see just this shift, right? And I wanted to get, Rob, some of your thoughts, as someone who's talking to CISOs every day, are you seeing that the increase? They were already stressed before, but especially with some of these indictments and these legal threats, how are they feeling? How do they seem when you're chatting with them, especially as you're trying to implement and improve on some of the things that they have in their org?
I feel very sorry for the CISOs that I work with during onboarding. They often start the meetings by stressing that they are accountable for the security of their environment. And I feel very sorry for them because of the anxiety that they have, that, they may not have been given the right tools or the right processes. And often that is the case. They wanted certain tools before, and they weren't given them, and unfortunately, they have paid the consequences. I know a lot of the CISOs I speak with have been telling me that the average tenure of their role in their company was 12 to 15 months, and they really want to protect their environment. And I think the accountability of the protection should be with whoever holds the budget for the tools that are used to protect the environment. And in this case, it probably is likely to be the CIO. I think the CISO should be responsible for the delivery of the tools which are purchased to protect the environment. I kind of think of this as the Spider-Man picture. Everyone is kind of pointing at each other, but to collaboration is key. make sure you automate everything you can so that those unknown unknowns, as I mentioned before, are more likely to actually be found and dealt with.
Yeah, and it's a little bit about when you've got automation on those routine tasks, then you have the time to actually communicate, collaborate, coordinate on the things that are big, that are unknown, maybe that feel or are just, really intractable, right? It's I was talking with a CISO in the US of a utility, and he was saying that he's stopped accepting speaking engagements because he's afraid of what of those words being used against him should something happen to his organization, right? He doesn't want to talk about the things that he's doing right inside of his organization, because should something happen, then they're going to use that against him. And it's fascinating to see, because I think he would agree with you that he's not the budget holder either. He's not the one who turns the knobs, does the configurations, actually implements the remediations or the security controls, but he's going to be the one held responsible. Yeah,
that's right.
It's a hard time for CISOs, but it was fascinating to see that, and it would be interesting to see what happens as the U.S. government in particular continues to push reporting requirements down on breaches. Yeah. So we're going to move to one of my favorite little topics, cyber insurance. This was, again, years ago, cyber insurance really hit the market, right? I think right after NotPetya with the Maersk attack, there's a big to do after that in the following incident response. But there were some folks who were talking about kind of what's happening in cyber insurance, right? What are they seeing? What's happening in terms of claims, and how can you make sure that your cyber insurance is the right insurance? So we thought we'd end on a little bit of this, very tactical. The folks on this panel really highlighted that ransomware attacks have become a huge issue, especially from a cyber insurance perspective, but not just in paying the ransom, the initial ransom. Oftentimes these attacks are followed by double or triple extortion, right? So if you pay the ransom, they say we won't leak the data if you pay the ransom. You pay the ransom, they do leak the data, they monetize that data, and then oftentimes they don't actually leave your system, right? They're somehow still in there so that they can come back and extort you again. That was a fascinating point that was made during this session, is that, I think there was a stat, I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but we'll link to this. The number of organizations who paid a ransom, there's some large percentage of them are become ransomware victims again within 5 years. It was fascinating and scary. There's also the personal attacks that are happening, AI use, the supply chain side as well. Neither of those were surprising given the trajectory of attacks and threat vectors that have grown over the last couple of years. But they did also have a slide here I'm showing around the tips for getting coverage and ensuring that you've got a good premium, as well as they sort of noted these are also if you fail at some of these are some of the reasons that your coverage would not actually kick in and support you, right? So a big one, of course, was patching diligence, but also all of the sort of normal things, right? Multi-factor, encrypting your data, having backups offsite, just sort of standard best practices for the security of your organization. Those are really important, as well as they note there being honest when you complete the application. And it was good to see that some of these best practices are what they're requiring for coverage and for low premiums. But wanted to kind of get your thoughts, Rob. Do you see customers that are having to report back to their cyber insurance? What's the kind of interaction that you're seeing? Like, are customers coming to you and saying, oh, we need XYZ so that we can report back to our insurers?
It's actually growing quite quickly, to be honest. And if we think about my golden rule that we've been doing our managed services for an extremely long time, is always be patching. Automate everything you can, which becomes your patch risk profile. Actually, I'm going to talk about the patch risk profile just to expand upon it. We actually just saw on that slide that once somebody becomes exploited and they get an attack, the attacker often stays within the environment, and this is what I call breadcrumbs. They often leave a way back in again, and often vulnerabilities have a telltale sign that they are weaponized, or that they have a jump point, or they have a particular identifier that we want to use as our patch risk profile. And that patch risk profile is then used to deploy all of the vulnerability remediations to all of your devices, and then simply to report on the success of this. Now, you do need to make sure you do this, and you need to make sure you revalidate that security risk profile at least every 6 months. Is there a new type of vulnerability type that we ought to be adding into our patch risk profile to cover ourselves? What is most important is that you must always do this, even if you don't believe anyone is watching. Because if you are breached, and you may not have been breached, but you're doing this purely for your insurance, you can prove to your auditor that you have maintained your strategy over time, therefore not allowing any of those auditors or the insurance to say, we're not actually going to cover you because you have just literally patched your environment at the point of the audit. But for the 11 months before that, everything was wide open.
That's fascinating, but makes a ton of sense, right? We've talked about continuous scanning, continuous remediations, and continuous patching over time. But oftentimes the reporting and the data, the auditing, it happens in a certain point in time. It's interesting to hear that now customers are being asked for it, on a more regular basis to show. And that's likely, I would imagine that that's going to become fairly true for anyone who's looking for cyber insurance and needing to comply with certain regulations.
Yeah. Just one thing I noticed about a particular vendor, very, very popular vendor across the world. I heard that potentially that exploit lasted for 2 whole months before they actually activated the payload. They were in and out of the environment for 2 whole months, laying the breadcrumbs to actually exploit it on the day that they decided. And that's, I think, why it is super important to actually show that you had your patching strategy working over time. So if there is a situation where they said they broke into your environment 2 months ago, you say, but I've been patching my environment for 6 months. This was not something I could have helped. And unfortunately, it was something completely unique and couldn't have been stopped.
Yeah, that's a great point. That was fabulous. Thanks, Rob. We're done with our slides and the topics for the day. We're going to turn to Q&A now. Really excited to see some of the questions that we've got coming in. So I'm going to just dive right in. First question I see here, where does Syxsense see itself as a platform solution or an innovation product? That's a great question. I can take that. We've been innovating over the last several years. We really started because we were actually working in this space as a implementation consultant for certain technologies. I'm not going to name who, but what we saw was, that technology just didn't work very well, right? But everyone had it. It was this legacy product, had huge market share, and what we saw was being in it day in and day out. It was clunky. There was no innovation. There were easier, better ways to do things, and there just was, but there wasn't any push towards it. And that's really the why Syxsense started and how we started. And so that innovation has sort of been core to who we are. That's sort of where we would put ourselves. There was a recent GigaOM report. GigaOM is a third-party analyst firm. It's more focused on the technical side, that we were rated in very well. And we're definitely on the innovation side of the house, but moving into sort of the a bit more of the center. We have added capabilities that enable us to provide additional capabilities and be a little bit more in the lean into some of the platform side, but definitely not, I wouldn't say in the platform area. So first question there. We can send a link to that report as well to folks in the follow-up. All right, so the next question. Does Syxsense track third-party vulnerabilities? Rob?
That's a great question for me. So yes, we do track. We have an automated and human team who's actually creating vulnerabilities. It's actually a fantastic question because it shows that you understand that a patch that's a vulnerability is also the same as a software misconfiguration vulnerability. It's all classified as a vulnerability. And we're actually able to track vulnerabilities, both patching and those OS and third-party application misconfigurations. We can track when they were first published. We can track when we have a remediation available for it, and we can actually track when it's actually remediated on the devices. We call this remediation or patch debt. It's where you can show that from the release of a vulnerability to the solving of it, you can actually track it in days. And we're actually doing this for an awfully long time now, because we do know that OS updates alone aren't enough to protect your environment.
Yep. Yeah, I totally get that. I'm very diligent about updating my Chrome and my browsers, because that is one of those things that end up on the user, right? You have to restart the browser. And I'm the kind of person who has like 50 tabs open on multiple browsers at any time. And but it's like, oh, when I get the little icon to restart, I'm like, I have to restart. I have to restart. Yeah.
Try to do it at the end of the day so that you don't lose all of your logons that you've left open.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't do that, right? That very much is one of those user patch things, updates that you have to do. And I can just, especially with given how many Chrome 0 days have come out this year already, it's a lot to leave that up to a user. Yeah,
indeed it is.
All right. That's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you all so much for joining us, sticking with us. My team is telling me that I need to let y'all know that we haven't forgotten about the Blanton's bottle giveaway. We will announce who's won the bottle via email in our follow-up. Sorry that we can't do that right here with you all right now, but keep an eye out for your inbox. We'll have a recording today's session, as well as a bunch of links to all of the materials that we've talked about. We could only do, of course, just a small short snippet recap, but we hope you found it exciting, enjoyable, learn something, and hopefully you'll come and join us next time. Thank you.